some big threat out there, and you are gonna help me stop it.
Wait, us?
Yes! Yes!
There are many times when you read a script and you're like, well, that's not gonna happen. They're not gonna let me do that. And to see the real sets and the real effects come together, it's just been an absolute joy. Avengers, you're gone. No one's coming to save the day.
We could be the people that are coming.
When I was in the English and Film Studies programs in college, there was a professor who every other semester taught a course on the concept of found family in Marvel movies. I never got the chance to enroll in it, unfortunately, but I think that it says a lot that this was such a prevalent thing. It was such a prevalent underlying theme throughout so many of these movies that someone was able to build and teach a course about it. And looking back, it was a very important part of the MCU's identity, and it's a very important pillar of comic book storytelling in general. So many superheroes and comic book characters in general are misfits, outcasts, orphans, people who are fundamentally flawed and have fundamentally flawed... Muffin, would you mind? Fundamentally flawed people who have fundamentally flawed upbringings in a lot of cases. People searching for meaning, people searching for belonging. People who struggle with the same things that a lot of us struggle with in real life. And one of the great things about comic books and superhero narratives is the fact that it allows us to take these things that all of us can relate to and kind of abstract them and look at them from another angle, look at them through the lens of escapism and fantasy, and maybe that can help someone work through something. Be that the creator or the audience, it can take these very real things that are kind of hard to face sometimes and make them easier to digest. And with the nature of crossovers and team-ups, it makes a lot of sense that this is a good space to tell stories about these people coming together, forming connections and maybe sometimes even familial bonds through some kind of shared desire to search for meaning and search for a place to belong. But that is, at the end of the day, a very human and sincere thing to explore, and there's been this trend over the past decade or so of our media becoming more and more cynical. Which cynicism in and of itself isn't inherently a bad thing to include in your story. Sometimes we do need that mirror held up to the uglier parts of life and ourselves. But when it's everywhere you look, it just starts to kind of feed into itself and insist upon itself. And obviously that leads to a lot of apathy and misanthropy. And then before you know it, those of us who don't want to be cynical all the time start to just resent a lot of what modern pop culture has to offer. And then the people who are fully Rick Sanchez South Park pilled start to resent it themselves or just become so apathetic to it that they lose interest. And then at that point, who is it being made for? At that point, it's just a product with no heart, no soul, nothing to say, and it's catering to a mindset that is really easy to cater to. Like, it is very easy to be cynical and to be nihilistic and to give in to that misanthropy. And we have to remember that in its earliest incarnation, comic books, and specifically superhero comic books, are stories about lifting people up and standing up to that evil and that cynicism, that nihilism. Like, I mean, come on, you had Superman in one of his earliest issues. I remember reading it in one of my intro to comics classes, where he goes off and intervenes in a foreign conflict because he doesn't care for geopolitical strategy. He just wants people to be safe, which sounds a little familiar now that I think about it. And, you know, you had Captain America famously in his first appearance socking Hitler in the face on the cover. Like, there is an acknowledgement of those evils, those injustices, and the more cynicism-inspiring aspects of life, but it's always challenged. and it has to be challenged, and I think that's the thing and should be the thing. Take something like The Boys, for example, which is so far up its own ass about how miserable people are, how awful people are, how cruel the world can be, which has this very strange fighting fire with fire approach that just comes off as kind of edgy and cringe in a lot of cases, where the best way to overcome that evil is to just give in to the evil yourself. Compare that to something like Daredevil, where we are shown those injustices and how cruel the world can be, but it's always challenged by this underlying sense of humanity and a perseverance. There's this genuine exploration of the altruism of superheroism in a world that can be violent and can be cruel. Like, it's edgy, like The Boys, but not edgy for the sake of the edge like The Boys is. Invincible kind of does the same thing, except it takes a more explicitly superhero route as opposed to Daredevil's more street-level vigilantism route. What I'm trying to get at is that, in my opinion, comic books, superhero stories do not lend themselves very easily to that cynicism and to that nihilism. Like, you have to be a generational talent in order to pull that off properly. And saying that just makes me think about how it's no wonder that Alan Moore is such a curmudgeon whenever it comes to this stuff. Like, what do you do whenever your work is just over and over again misread and misinterpreted? It's just this broader trend that I think stems from this sort of 14-year-old South Park fan brand of, like, apathy and, like, a fundamental misreading of works from authors like Alan Moore or Frank Miller or Grant Morrison. Like, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. Like, it is easy to be cynical and to be apathetic, and it's easy to create a story that just kind of wallows in that. But, I mean, it's always so much more rewarding and so much more impactful whenever you do make something that shows the overcoming of that adversity. And a lot of the time, the best way to overcome that adversity is to find common ground and come together. After all, everyone can use a little help. I mean, we are social creatures after all. And sure, there may be clashes and there may be disagreements, but that's just the nature of family, and you can find family in the most unlikely of places. And I think that that's the kind of stories that the MCU and creators working in this space are really good at telling. Stories about people coming together to challenge that adversity and to dissent from the apathy and overcome what burdens them. After all, it was kind of built into the mandate of this whole creative experiment that is the MCU. The idea of this interconnected world where characters and concepts can cross over and interact and form relationships. All of this to say that friendship is magic, and we can overcome that cynicism with the power of friendship, and that is Thunderbolts. Like, Thunderbolts really does feel like an MCU movie from another time, from a time when it was still kind of exciting and there were so many fun things being done and interesting things being explored. It feels like a peak Phase 2 movie, from a time when Marvel Studios and Disney weren't concerned with pushing out as much product as they could, and instead were just more focused on facilitating these filmmakers and these creatives using their characters and using their world to tell the stories that they wanted to tell. And this is something that I've talked about before, about how this is something that's clearly been lost over the past few years, and, you know, we keep getting article after article and quotes from press conferences and interviews about how that wasn't working and this wasn't working, how they want to get back to this more quality over quantity approach that kind of made this little experiment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe special to begin with. What built a franchise and made narratives and characters that have stuck with people and mean so much to so many people. And it really does feel like Thunderbolts is kind of a statement, like a film that actually has something to say. It and doesn't feel like it was made by committee on a soundstage or in the volume. That can have an actual groundedness and grit to its action, its filmmaking, and its visual tone, but also its characters. Something more akin to those earlier films from the first three phases, where things were more character driven. And even during this little dark age that we've kind of had over the past few years, the MCU projects that have resonated the most with people are the ones that do take that more grounded, character driven approach. things like Loki and WandaVision, Guardians Volume 3, and Moon Knight, even though it didn't work for a lot of people, I do think that Multiverse of Madness deserves some credit for at least trying to give Doctor Strange a more introspective angle as a character. It worked for me. I know it didn't work for a lot of other people, but I liked it. And surprisingly, Thunderbolts is one of the most character-driven ensemble/team-up stories that Marvel has ever done. And it honestly embodies something that comic book storytelling has always been about. Taking these things that all of us can relate to and struggle with ourselves and abstracting them and personifying them. Opening up a dialogue between the audience, the creators, and the characters. You know, maybe in a Spider-Man story, it's something like the middle-class struggle and work-life balance. In a Daredevil story, it can be something about faith and fidelity to oneself and the people around you. In a Captain America story, it can be conviction and strength of character. And what Jake Schreier, Eric Pearson, and Joanna Kahlo settled on for the Thunderbolts is mental health. The importance of having a support structure and being open and vulnerable. All of these characters are not only misfits and outcasts, but they're also all dealing with some kind of shortcoming or baggage. And there is a maturity and tact that the script approaches these things with. There isn't any undercutting of serious and emotional moments with like Joss Whedon tier sarcasm, which is something that Marvel has this strange reputation for that I've never really understood. This idea of like Marvelisms, like this idea that every serious moment needs to be punctuated with a joke. Like, there are so many people who 100% fully believe that anything with the Marvel name on it has to have that. Like, there's some kind of behind the scenes mandate that has to happen. But speaking as someone who actually watches these movies and these shows, that's just not a thing. It's only really a thing in the movies that were written and directed by a very specific guy and the people who try to kind of emulate his style, which isn't every Marvel movie. And that guy being Joss Whedon. Age of Ultron, I think, is the worst offender of this, which came out in 2015, which was around the time that you kind of first started seeing people talk about these Marvelisms and stuff like that. But like I said, it only really exists in the way that they describe it in things made by a very specific guy, and with the recency bias of that being the most recent Marvel thing at the time. It's kind of like that same thing of like every superhero movie, every Marvel movie lacks tone and is like drab. But you only started seeing people talk about that around the time Civil War came out, which that movie's color palette and visual tone is deliberately meant to be kind of brutalist and drab.
It's obviously shot very differently than Civil War and Winter Soldier. The colors are very different. Those two movies were intentionally desaturated, brutalist. We knew that we were going to embrace color very early on in Infinity War. And the cameras are what we call studio mode. You know, they're on dollies, Steadicam, cranes. It's more of a presentational image. We do handheld at various points in the movie, but it's instinctual moments for us. It's not a mandate like it was in Civil War and Winter Soldier. The set was designed for more warmth than we traditionally
we
do.
combined more color temperatures in this scene, I think, than we would have in those other films, even on Earth. And
there's a modern edge to both of those movies that, again, also is about smashing Captain America into the modern world in a way that creates conflict.
And like literally the year after Civil War, we got Guardians Volume 2 and Spider-Man Homecoming and Thor Ragnarok, which are very vibrant and colorful movies. But it's this really strange thing where everyone saw a creative decision that they just kind of disagreed with, but didn't have the capacity to acknowledge the fact that it was a creative decision made by people working under Marvel. So they just kind of thought it was this studio-wide sort of thing. And then because they love to hate, they just kind of saw it everywhere and acted like it was this prevalent thing when really it only existed in one instance. Okay, anyway, tangent over. What I was trying to get at was the fact that Thunderbolts has this earnestness that has really been kind of lacking in a lot of recent Marvel projects. And that really comes through in the fact that it's a kind of old school movie by contemporary standards, because there's a lot of shooting on location, there's a lot of practical effects, there's a lot of cool stunt work.
You can actually capture something amazing and shoot it. There is this kind of human, breathtaking quality to that.
always down for Down and Dirty because it gives a different flavor to the choices that you make as an actor.
Like I said earlier, it doesn't feel like it was made on a soundstage or in the volume. That earnestness also comes through in the way that its characters are handled. Yelena's struggle with loneliness after losing her sister and her place in life, while not all of us are highly specialized covert agents, I think that all of us can relate to that feeling of being dissatisfied and being unfulfilled. And, you know, some of us deal with it in less than savory ways, like the way that Yelena drinks herself into a stupor and wallows in her loneliness whenever she's not on assignment. Or how John Walker, still kind of grappling with those feelings of never living up to the expectations that he thinks everyone sets out for him, trying to kind of make up for that perceived shortcoming with this arrogance and cocksure attitude, which just kind of comes off as a lack of self-awareness and ends up just being very abrasive to not only the rest of the Thunderbolts in the beginning of the movie, but also to his family. Like, he literally forsakes his family or any real path to self-actualization that he has to just kind of wallow in his own self-pity, literally just like doom scrolling while his infant son cries for his attention. And that's real shit. And it is interesting to see Bucky kind of take a page out of Matt Murdock's book, trying to pursue a more quote-unquote proper career and way to help people. Like, after the Avengers are effectively disbanded, he decides to go into politics and becomes an elected member of Congress, which, I mean, you know, go off, I guess. Go off, King. But after growing more and more dissatisfied with the shortcomings and ineffectiveness of the system that he operates under, he wants to take a more direct approach, even if that means going back to some of his older ways that he wants to get away from. Because really, what does that mean whenever you have a skill set like his and you forgo using it to help other people in favor of the red tape, bureaucratic nightmare that is the American political system?
Oh, system! Right!
And Red Guardian, Alexei, he's kind of that pure embodiment of the earnestness. I put him in the same category as characters like Vigilante from Peacemaker. Like the type of character that is really, really easy to mess up and to fumble. Earnest almost to a fault and super sincere in their enthusiasm and very open, specifically about what they want, and what they want is what they think is best for the people that they care about. And I think that that is the differentiating factor between a character like Alexei or Vigilante and a character like Jar Jar Binks. They have to care. Like, just for contrast, think about Jar Jar. Think about him in the movies. Does he actually care about anything? Like, he's just kind of a bumbling people pleaser. And he's very sincere about it, but what is Jar Jar's ethos? Yeah, what is Jar Jar's ethos? What does he care about? What does he want? And I think that's why he didn't work for so many people who watched the prequels, but as soon as some of the Clone Wars writers got their hands on him, they injected an actual sense of what Jar Jar wants, what his goals are. Like, he has an actual drive to help the people that he represents in Congress. Oh yeah, man. There's nothing inherently silly about Star Wars. What I'm trying to say is that they took this empty shell of a character who is kind of just a people pleaser and gave him actual agency and turned him into an actual character. And I'm thinking specifically about the episodes where he assists in getting humanitarian aid to the people of Ryloth while it's under siege by the Separatists. Or, you know, like Vigilante considers Peacemaker and the 11th Street Kids his only friends. They're the only people that he has, and he genuinely has a drive to make their lives better and to, you know, fight crime and skinheads and evil aliens as well. And Red Guardian wants to be a superhero. He has these heroes of his own that he looks up to and wants to be like. And he also wants to be a family man. He also wants to be a good father to Yelena. He's kind of the first person to see the potential in the team, not only as heroes who can kind of save the day, but also a kind of family. He's like an expert people reader. He sees this group of people who are all missing something, who could really benefit from having each other. It's like Nick Fury in Phase 1, except less about putting together a team of remarkable people who could fight the battles that we never could, but more about putting together a group of losers and rejects who really could just use each other. And then there's the real main character, the reason that this all works, and genuinely one of the most interesting and layered, well-realized characters that the MCU has given us in a really long time. Bob. Bob actually has nobody, and this really is where Valentina comes in, too. She represents those forces who want to take advantage of that loneliness, use it as leverage over someone so that they can use them as just a rung on a ladder, many such cases. Bob was easily manipulable and put down this very dangerous pipeline because he felt like he had no other course of action. And in true comic book story fashion, this very real phenomena is abstracted into something more fantastical, like a really shady super soldier program, instead of something more innocuous, like, I don't know, Hustlers University. Bob is just kind of forgotten and left in this stasis pod thing for years, because like in real life, so many of these people who are taken advantage of are just kind of tossed aside eventually because people like Valentina don't actually know or care about them. But Bob and the rest do soon find out that this whole thing did change him, and it did give him powers. But it's not like Steve Rogers getting juiced up by the super soldier serum and becoming better for it because he already was a good guy, or even Walker getting super soldiered and that kind of exasperating his flaws. This is something much more volatile, and it is sort of that same old super soldier serum thing that we established way back in the first Avenger, where Erskine said that the serum has the capacity to amplify certain traits in the user. And Bob, well, we soon find out that he isn't the most stable of individuals, and this really is one of those things that I applaud this screenplay for, in the way that I talk about how it does have a tact and maturity with which it tackles its subject matter. Bob obviously suffers from some form of BPD. He talks about how he has these drastic mood swings, he has really good days, really bad days, memory lapses whenever he acts out, but it's never explicitly stated. We just use the vehicle of this really shady super soldier program and his superpowers as a way to abstract this very real thing that so many people actually deal with and make it easier for people to kind of look at. And I think that Lewis Pullman does just such an amazing job of portraying that sort of inner conflict that he has. It's something that I myself can absolutely relate to, and I saw it as I was watching the movie. This push and pull that he has when he's interacting with someone else, where he really, really wants to trust them and be vulnerable with them, but he doesn't quite let himself go all the way because he doesn't want to be a burden, and he doesn't want to be a drag or make anything worse for anyone. So you get these moments in the first act between him and Yelena where he almost lets her in, and then you have other moments where he interacts with someone like Walker where he almost gives too much away in the way that he acts. You can tell that there's something about the way that John acts that just really irks him, and he doesn't want to bring it up because he's afraid of being upfront about anything because he thinks that it'll just make the situation worse. So instead, he just kind of punctuates the entire situation with a snide remark, instead of realizing that he should be comfortable enough to work it out, and that John should be mature enough to work it out with him. And that right there is what I'm talking about with the abstraction of these very real things that so many people deal with. Like, these interactions are just larger-than-life versions of real things that people deal with all the time. And when we realize the extent of Bob's powers, the whole BPD thing becomes even more clear. Once again, we have Valentina taking advantage of the loneliness and cynicism that Bob has within himself, using it to manipulate and mold him into what she wants, especially now that she knows that one of her little experiments actually kind of worked out. She turns him into the Sentry, a hero for a new era. Now that the Avengers don't exist, Who's gonna keep people safe? Who's gonna keep the American people safe? Pay no mind to the fact that I completely manufactured this man's consent to this whole thing. And, since I don't actually care for his well-being, I'm only exasperating and taking advantage of his mental health issues and enabling the volatility of his condition that I did not put any effort into investigating. It's kind of like Homelander, but more human. Whereas Homelander is a sociopath because he's a test tube baby who was raised in a lab and is a manufactured superhero, and he's been kind of just showered in that adulation his entire life. Sentry can be a sociopath because he's being fed these lies about how he's more powerful than all the Avengers combined. But because inside he is still that scared little boy hiding in the attic from the father who beat him and told him that he makes everything worse, he's just kind of being pushed into this mindset that because now he has any sort of tangible power, that he can just kind of do anything now. Like, this is the superhero version of having an episode. He's kind of having a psychotic break. He lashes out at his friends and literally thinks that he's a god. But then reality comes crashing in and he goes from that very high to a very low. That depressive, cynical side of him fully comes out and manifests as the Void. That part of him that thinks that it's easier to just wallow until it consumes your life, and the part of him that thinks that it's easier to just give up. We saw bits of this in the first act. I think that it's very beautifully illustrated when John grabs Bob's hand to pull him out of the elevator shaft. An aspect of Bob's powers very briefly manifest, and John is pulled into this third-person replay of this very shameful moment that he probably thinks about a lot, where his wife scolds him for neglecting their son. He's literally just doom-scrolling like I mentioned earlier. He's in love with his own misery and trying to make up for those perceived shortcomings in such a way that it drives his wife and kid to just leave him, which, is revealed by Bucky in an absolutely diabolical manner. Like, he just says it out loud, clear as day, in front of everyone. And it's kind of funny looking back on it, but, I feel like it's something Bucky would do. After that vision, we snap back to reality, and John is staring down into that deep darkness of the elevator shaft, standing on the edge, almost looking like he wants to plunge into that darkness and give up. Obviously that was very intentional from a blocking and cinematography standpoint to help drive home the fact that the character of the Void and Bob's powers as the Void are, as an antagonist, an allegory for suicide, be that metaphorical or literal. And again, that goes back to the tact and maturity that I keep bringing back up. Like, this movie is trying to tell a very mature story about very mature things that need to be talked about. Like, especially now with this prevalence of cynicism and nihilism in a lot of our media. And it does it in such a way that is so befitting of a comic book story and a superhero movie. Only in a movie like this can we have Bob and the rest of the Thunderbolts physically confront their pasts. Like, overcome that tendency that so many of us have to overthink these things. Play back these memories in our head over and over again, thinking about the things that we've done and how people perceive them and how they've affected us and how we can use them as an excuse to just not be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And they do it in such an interesting way from a filmmaking perspective too, with these enclosed spaces that have literal matte painting backgrounds in them, and the way that all of them physically connect to each other, all for everyone to make it through this mind palace emotional obstacle course to make it to the person who is hurting the most, where we can have Bob physically confront that part of him that wants to give up, that wants to give in. And he thinks that he has to do it alone, but whenever he does, he just ends up doing what that devil on his shoulder wants him to do. It wants him to take that The Boys-esque, nihilistic, cynical route and violently end it. But that is when everyone finally realizes that what they're here to do is to support each other. Like, be that family that all of them desperately need. So instead of giving into that cynicism, they embrace each other and they let Bob know that he doesn't have to do this by himself. That he can be open and vulnerable and not get burned. That he can heal, just with a little bit of help from people who care about him. all of the Thunderbolts, or the New Avengers, whatever you want to call them, when the movie starts, they're all going it alone. And the first time that they meet, there's this sort of hesitancy that they all have about admitting that they can work together. And over the course of the movie, they're all constantly being reminded that they don't have to go it alone. And something is keeping them together. And by the end of the movie, when they all embrace and defeat that loneliness and that cynicism, I think they realize what it was that was keeping them together, and it was friendship, family. And yes, unironically, a Marvel movie ends with a group of misfits defeating the physical embodiment of cynicism with the power of friendship and family. And it's great. When me and my friends walked out of the movie after seeing it for the first time, my girlfriend said that it gave her that same feeling that she had walking out of the first Avengers movie. Like, we just watched that family unit form. It really is like the MCU forgot what it could be and what it means to so many people. And I think that this just kind of goes to show that a lot of the stuff that I've said in previous videos about the future of the MCU just keeps getting validated. And that is on God. Anyway, my camera battery is getting low. I should wrap this up. So, bye.